Kimberly Baker Medina is an immigration attorney in private practice in Fort Collins, specializing in deportation defense, family-based immigration, asylum, immigrant children, and immigrant victims of crime. Prior to opening her office in Fort Collins in 2003, Kim worked in San Francisco providing legal services to homeless and low-income families, and also lived as an immigrant for 6 years in Honduras. She is a member of Fuerza Latina in Fort Collins, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, the National Lawyers Guild, and the recipient of the AILA Colorado 2013 Pro Bono Service Award. Kim's going to talk to us about changes in immigration during the Trump administration with an emphasis on changes during COVID.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thanks for that introduction. So before we talk about what the Trump administration has done to immigration, we need just a basic understanding of how immigration laws work in this country. A lot of us don't understand that, and so before we kind of get into the debate about what we need to change or what's happened, it's really important to understand how people come here and how laws are made. Immigration laws are made a number of ways. One is the obvious way, they're made through Congress, but there haven't been any significant changes in immigration laws made through Congress since really 1996. Immigration laws are also made through treaties and international agreements. For example, there are agreements that provide that the United States will give asylum to refugees. And there are protocols and convention agreements that support asylum and lead us to have asylum. Immigration laws are also made through judicial decisions. So the federal courts, immigration courts, make decisions, and then that creates immigration law. All of the immigration courts are under the Department of Justice. So here's where we start to see that the executive branch has a lot of power when it comes to immigration. The Executive Office of Immigration Review is under the Department of Justice. The Board of Immigration Appeals is under the Department of Justice. And the Attorney General can cite cases to him or herself, which allows them to make law whenever they want to. And Attorney Generals Sessions and Barr have been very active, more active than any other Attorney General in history, in making immigration law by citing cases to themselves. Finally, federal courts in the judicial branch also make law, but getting to federal court and the judicial branch is out of reach for most immigrants. So most immigrants are operating under laws which are controlled primarily by the executive branch. In addition, the executive branch can make executive orders. We've seen a lot of this under the Trump administration. And the executive branch is responsible for the administration of the laws. So the Department of Homeland Security is a huge agency encompassing both enforcement and administration. Administration of laws means people who are applying to get status. So that would be through the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service. It also involves the Department of State, and the Department of State gives people status who live overseas and want to immigrate lawfully to the United States. And then finally, the laws, the enforcement of immigration laws, are also under the jurisdiction and the power of the executive branch. The Department of Homeland Security also has the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement Office, commonly known as ICE. So given that structure, how do people manage to come here legally to the United States? Over 70% of people who legally immigrate to the United States come here sponsored by a family member. So families of citizens or family of residents. When I say residents, I refer to what people think sometimes as a green card holder. So families of citizens or families of residents petition for someone. They account for about approximately 70% of the residencies obtained. And of these family-based residencies, over 70% of them are processed overseas. That's going to be important when we talk about what this administration has done to legal immigration. Okay, so remember that they encompass the majority of people who come here to live permanently, and most of those cases are processed overseas. People can also come here with an employment-based petition. They can obtain permanent residence that way. And about 80% of those residencies, the employment-based residencies, are processed in the United States as opposed to overseas. And finally, there's a humanitarian path to living permanently in the United States. So those would be programs like asylum and also programs for victims of crime and trafficking.
So Kim, what has the Trump administration, what have their goals been with immigration?
They've been pretty clear about it. One of their goals has been to eliminate family-based immigration. Another has been to dismantle asylum protections. They've wanted to increase the removals of immigrants to the United States. They've wanted to drastically reduce lawful immigration. They have wanted to reduce the number of people seeking protection within our borders. And they want to implement a merits-based immigration system as opposed to a family-based, and other policies that basically weed out people of color and low-income families.
And what has the Trump administration been successful in doing?
So let's take a look. This is not an inclusive list. The Migration Policy Institute just came out with a document that is 140 pages or something that has a really comprehensive list of what the Trump administration has done to our immigration system. So this list is not inclusive. It's kind of a glance. We're going to focus on what's happened really this year and under COVID, but it's substantial and it's significant. What this administration has done. So the first thing that they did is they've placed more people in deportation, arrested more people, and removed protections for people. So for example, one of the things that they did is that they eliminated prosecutorial discretion. Under the Obama administration, government prosecutors could choose whether or not they were going to pursue a deportation against someone or not. So if someone had been here for a long time and they had no criminal history and they had a lot of family members who were legal in the United States, a federal immigration prosecutor may say, we're not going to prosecute that case. That's been eliminated. So anyone and everyone is subject to deportation, and the government lawyers no longer have the ability to say that this is not a case that we want to prosecute. They have to take every case to its end, which is the deportation if someone doesn't win their case. During the Obama administration, a lot of cases were closed under this practice of prosecutorial discretion, and the Trump administration has ordered that those cases all be reopened. So what we're seeing during COVID is people are getting notices that a case that was closed 10 years ago is now being reopened. They have enacted a policy that victims of crimes are no longer protected from deportation. So previously, if we had someone who was seeking immigration status as a victim of a crime, we could stop the deportation. In the meantime, we can no longer do that. They have ended the Obama policy of not detaining pregnant women. And they have enacted a policy of reopening cases of people who are in DACA status, that's Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. So even if they're in valid DACA status, this administration is reopening those cases if they've previously been in removal. Another thing that they've done in an effort to increase the arrests of immigrants is that they are attempting to expand something called expedited removal into the interior. What this means is that traditionally expedited removal has functioned at the border. So if someone's within 100 miles of the border, they don't have the same protections as people who have been here, and they can be summarily deported without a chance to see a judge. It's an administrative deportation. So they're trying to expand that into the interior. That's currently under injunction. They're trying to crack down on sanctuary policies. They are encouraging localities to cooperate with ICE, and they have significantly increased worksite enforcement.
And how have things changed in the immigration courts?
They're a nightmare, quite honestly. This administration has succeeded in stripping away protections and making the immigration courts basically dysfunctional. We have unprecedented court backlogs. The backlog has increased over 71% between 2017 and 2020. There are well over 1 million cases backlogged in the courts. And in the midst of all of this backlog, and then of course the courts have been closed because of the COVID crisis. And in the midst of this backlog and court closures, the administration continues to arrest and place people in deportation and reopen cases that have been closed. They are placing more people into deportation after denying them applications. So previously, if someone submitted an application and maybe they didn't qualify for that immigration benefit, they would take your money and that would be the end of the story. But now what they're doing is they have a policy where if you apply for something you don't qualify, they will place you in deportation proceedings. So a lot of more people are being placed in deportation just because they try to apply for benefits for themselves, immigration benefits. And then another thing that the administration has done, which is important to us here locally, is that they created a pilot program that the goal of which is to accelerate the deportation of families. This is an effort to deal with huge numbers of asylum seekers coming to our southern border, mostly women and children, and mostly from El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. And so one of the things that the Trump administration did is they started a pilot program. There are 10 locations, and Denver is one of those locations. And so the families that come to Denver after January 2019, they'll only have 365 days to fight their case, which is impossible. And most of these people don't even know that they're in deportation proceedings. They won't try to get a judge until they've been here a good 6 months. And at that point, we've only got a couple months to work on the case. And there are almost 120,000 people right now in these pilot programs, in these expedited deportation programs, accelerated deportation. The administration has been very successful in stripping away due process protections, and they've done this in a number of ways. It's happened through executive order. It's happened through those attorney general citing cases to himself. And it's happened through changes in policies and practices. But they have limited or nearly eliminated the ability of someone who's in deportation to request a continuance, say to get an attorney or to submit an application. They have weakened and nearly eliminated previously instated practices in court that were child-friendly. So they're putting more and more children in deportation, but they're making the courts less friendly for those children. They're ending administrative closure of cases so that every case will proceed to removal. They ended a program where spouses of U.S. citizens could get a pardon or a waiver in the United States, and they've ended that program so that people now have to leave the country and wait years overseas to try to get a waiver so that they can be reunited with their family. And then there are the Attorney General decisions, and those were mostly administrative actions, but the Attorney General decisions have been coming hard and fast. And they include things like limiting asylum seekers' rights to hearings, limiting asylum for victims of private violence, which has had a huge impact on victims of gender-based violence, LGBTQ people who are fleeing countries like Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, where they face horrific persecution, people who are fleeing gang violence. They've ended the continuances for people with other applications pending. So if you're a victim of a crime and you've applied for what's called a U visa because you're a victim of a crime, they won't continue that case anymore. Your case charges ahead, and if your benefits are not ready, too bad. They have eliminated terminating cases. They have, those decisions have placed limits on asylum based on family membership. So for example, there's a line of cases of people, for example, somebody from Mexico who has a family member who's targeted by cartels, and they're saying, no, you can't seek asylum on that basis anymore. They have placed limitations on a form of relief for people who've lived here over 10 years and have family members who would suffer very severe hardship, spouses, wives and husbands and wives, children, parents, and they've limited that. They have limited relief from deportation for torture victims in 2 separate Attorney General decisions. I felt it necessary to do that twice. And it continues. So we've seen a tremendous impact on the courts through these Attorney General opinions. And then finally, and especially during COVID, the administration have taken a lot of actions that have basically resulted in packing the courts with judges who are unfriendly to asylum seekers and unfriendly to people who are seeking relief. They've done things like tried to break up the judges' union. They've forbidden judges from talking about immigration cases to the public. And in August, just recently, they proposed a new rule that would limit the power of the Board of Immigration Appeals. It would result in expedited decisions at that board, and it would give attorneys and applicants less time to prepare their appeals.
And what's happening with asylum seekers?
Well, asylum seekers have been a special target of this administration. Some of that we already know about prior to COVID, so everybody remembers the refugee ban. The administration ended a program that's called the Central American Minors Refugee Program, or CAM. That was a program for minors in Central America. And we've seen a huge increase in young people coming to the border who are unaccompanied without their parents. A lot of those young people actually have parents in the United States in temporary protected status. And so what the Obama administration did is they set up a program where these parents and children could apply for a legal avenue to come to the United States to be with their parents. And the Trump administration ended that. They have reduced refugee admissions. They've significantly narrowed asylum eligibility. We kind of talked about that above. They've changed credible fear interviews and made those much more difficult. So when people come to the border seeking asylum, they have to express a fear of return and they get an interview, and they've made changes that make those nearly impossible to pass. But the attack on asylum has continued during COVID and during this pandemic. In fact, the administration in March suspended refugee admissions. They placed a ban on asylum seekers and are summarily returning people without even giving them those credible fear interviews. They are continuing a program that's called Remain in Mexico, MPP, it's called, but Remain in Mexico is what most people know it by. And those people are waiting in Mexico. They're Central American asylum seekers, and they are not let into the country. They're forced to wait in Mexico. And then during COVID, those hearings were suspended. So these people are just camping out in Mexico since March. In June, the administration proposed new asylum regulations that basically gut asylum as we know it. They're terrifying. They raise the bar for the screenings at the border to a point where most people would not pass that. They eliminate multiple grounds for asylum. They would allow judges to reject applications without a hearing, and it would ban people who pass through a third country. So someone from Honduras who passes through Mexico would not even be qualified for asylum. And then it would give new grounds for what's called a frivolous application. A frivolous application is one that has facts that are not true, but the consequences for filing a frivolous application are huge. It means the rest of your life you can't get status. This is really important when we realize that most asylum seekers are not represented by counsel. Okay, so when they are allowing judges to reject an application without a hearing, that application might have been prepared by somebody who's sleeping under a bridge in Mexico trying to get a hearing at the border, right? Like, these people don't have access to attorneys. A lot of them are families. A lot of them are unaccompanied minors. So these changes are basically going to eliminate a lot of asylum as we know it. And then it continued in Corona, during the coronavirus epidemic. In July, there was a proposed ban on asylum seekers who travel through countries affected by a serious disease. And finally, what the administration has done is, traditionally, people who are seeking asylum are allowed to get a work permit after their application has been pending for 6 months. And the Trump administration is trying to eliminate those work permits as well. So they're placing new fees on asylum. They're placing new restrictions on who can get a work permit. They've eliminated 30-day processing for those. And now they're saying that people have to wait 12 months instead of 6 months to get a work permit. So let's go back to who a lot of these asylum seekers are, right? Maybe it's a single woman who's fleeing domestic violence from a country like Honduras with her children. And she comes to the border, and now she's only got a year to find a lawyer and find somebody to fight her case. She's got tougher immigration. She's got tougher restrictions. She has less access to asylum, and the rules are tougher. She can't hire a lawyer because she doesn't have a permit to work, and now she won't get a permit to work for 12 months, but her case has to be heard in 12 months. So really, the administration is making it virtually impossible for these people to get asylum.
And what other impacts have there been on legal immigration?
So, this is very interesting and scary. The Trump administration has made it really clear that they want to limit legal immigration and that they want to do away with family-based immigration. But they can't change the laws unless they can get Congress to do it. And Congress, like we said, hasn't acted on immigration since 1996. So what Trump managed to do is, under the guise of COVID, basically eliminate family-based immigration. He reached his goal. And so how did he do this? Very clever. So first, the administration, under the guise of COVID, suspended routine visa services abroad. Consulates were closed. Then in April, issued a proclamation, which was extended in June, and the excuse given was COVID. And in doing this, the administration was very clever. So while the excuse was COVID, they based this proclamation on economic impact of COVID. And they said that immigrants are going to negatively impact the economy. The economy is suffering because of COVID. Because the justification is economic, this proclamation can extend well past the pandemic. So we can fully anticipate that this proclamation, whose stated purpose is to save U.S. jobs, if this administration is reelected, will continue on until our economy is whole again. Who knows how long this will take. So what does the proclamation do? The proclamation basically ends residencies obtained in consulates abroad. Now, remember when we talked earlier, we talked about 65 to 70% of residencies or green cards are family-based, and over 70% of those family-based green cards are obtained at the consulate, right? So if he ends residencies at the consulate, he can end family-based immigration. And when we talked at the very beginning about employment-based immigration, 80% of employment-based residencies are obtained in the US. So those can continue, right? So people who are engineers or doctors or professors or have companies petitioning them, they can still get their residency. But people who are petitioning for their family members can no longer come into the country. This administration has then ended family-based residency for all family members of citizens and green card holders, except for spouses and minor children of citizens. They are the only people who can get legal residency. Interesting when one considers that the spouse of the president obtained her residency through marriage to a U.S. citizen. But anyway, so no more parents of U.S. citizens, no more siblings of U.S. citizens, no more adult children of U.S. citizens, and no more family of green card holders. In addition, the proclamation ends most non-immigrant visas. And what we have seen is that people have been stuck overseas. So people who started their case and then went to a consulate, they have maybe a spouse in the United States who's a resident, or maybe their 21-year-old child who's a U.S. citizen petitioned for them, and they're stuck there. They can't come back. It's going to have a huge impact on the number of people coming to this country, and it basically guts family-based immigration. And then there have been changes to legal immigration for people who are getting their status inside the United States as well. Most of these are fairly subtle. You won't hear about them in the news, but they have had a substantial impact. One thing is to know is that Citizenship and Immigration Services is a fee-based agency, meaning that they only operate based on the fees that they collect. There were shortfalls even prior to COVID, but there have been a decrease in applications. And this administration has mismanaged that money. They've doubled their spending on fraud prevention. They've tripled their spending on vetting applications and trying to kick people off of programs. And so now they're running out of money. So they're threatening to furlough people. They're kind of fighting about that, Congress in that. They're raising their fees. Some of the fees are doubling. Some of the fees, there's an application for a family member of a crime victim that's going up over 300%. Citizenship is doubling. And those fees will be effective October 2nd, right, during the pandemic. So people who want to legally fix their status are going to have to pay twice as much as they did before. And we're talking thousands of dollars. And now the administration is going to charge a fee for asylum applications. Asylum applications, again, we are party to international agreements and conventions that require us to accept refugees, and we've never charged people seeking asylum to submit an application. But the Trump administration will begin charging, which means that we will join only 3 other countries in the world that charge people seeking protection from persecution. So it will be the United States, Australia, Fiji, and Iran, the only people that charge for an asylum application. Huge processing delays. Case processing time has increased over 100% under this administration. They are continuing to update their practices, expanding the discretion of immigration officers to deny cases, which will result in more denials, processing delays, and making benefits harder to obtain. And then another thing that the administration has done is something called, they're implementing an analysis called public charge. The public charge analysis means that they will look at people who want to live in the United States, and they will balance a huge list of factors to decide whether or not this person is going to be an economic burden on the United States. It's estimated that at least 69% of green card applicants will have one of the characteristics negatively viewed on this list. And what are those characteristics? Can you speak English? What kind of education do you have? Do you have advanced degrees? What kind of savings do you have? What kind of credit score do you have? What kind of money do you have in the bank? Do you own property? And so this public charge analysis is also being used to screen people out, and it's being applied both at the consulates and at immigration services and in the courts.
And what's going on with DACA? And maybe could you give us a quick overview of what DACA is?
Sure. So DACA is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It was an executive order under President Obama. The Obama administration, or President Obama, issued an executive order because something called the DREAM Act, which was a piece of legislation that would have given legal status to people who had lived in the United States since they were children and had no criminal history. The DREAM Act could never pass. So the DREAM Act was reintroduced in Congress from 2001 until 2012, when finally President Obama issued an executive order creating Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It is based upon, deferred action is something that's been in immigration law for a long time. Many people live here in deferred action status. So it can be people who are waiting for applications, people who can't be returned to their country but maybe don't qualify for asylum, a whole host of people. And so since 2012, young people with no criminal history have been applying to renew their status every 2 years. And basically you say to the government, I'm deportable, but please don't deport me now because I meet these qualifications. And so they get a work permit and they can stay. Well, the Trump administration from day one has wanted to end the DACA program, and they took it to the courts. They went to the Supreme Court and they lost. But what the Supreme Court said is that it's not that you don't have the power to end DACA, it's that you can't end it this way. So everyone anticipated that after that Supreme Court decision, that DACA would open up for new applicants, because no one has been able to apply since 2012. So there's a whole generation of young people who turned 15 and who are not able to apply for that program, as well as a lot of people who were perhaps fearful or couldn't get the paperwork to apply the first time. But they are not taking new applications. And in fact, in July, they issued a memo partially rescinding the DACA program, this administration, and they said no new applications. They said all renewals will be on a case-by-case basis, so a stricter standard than we had previously. They are only giving work permits for 1 year instead of 2, which means that people will basically, you have to apply 5 months before it expires. So you'll pay the government money and then you'll pay them again. So people are going to be paying twice as much money and waiting pretty much all year long for their new card to arrive. So if this administration has another term, we can fully anticipate that they will end the DACA program. There's another program similar to DACA called Temporary Protected Status. Temporary Protected Status, there are over 400,000 people in Temporary Protected Status. Most of them are from El Salvador. Also Honduras has a significant amount of people. And that's being litigated. And we just got a bad decision from the Ninth Circuit saying that, in fact, the Trump administration can end temporary protected status for certain groups. It's anticipated that because of the decision, that this administration, if given another term, will move forward with ending temporary protected status. So if you look at the combined termination of the DACA program, which is about 500,000 people, and the termination of temporary protected status, which is another 500,000 people, that's 1 million people right there who are kicked out of the country. Then if you look at the fact that we have virtually eliminated family-based immigration, that's a huge number of people that are being kicked out by that program. So really, the administration has succeeded in ending lawful immigration without even going to Congress.
Thanks so much for all that information. Can you finally, just in ending, talk a little bit about the border and the wall?
Sure. So the border's been a big issue for the Trump administration. We talked about the MPP, or Return to Mexico program, that began in January of 2019. It was expanded under COVID-19. The administration has used COVID as an excuse to close the U.S.-Mexico border. They've banned travel from 31 countries. They're continuing to use this public health statute that they are stating that they're using this to enact more COVID restrictions, but they're using it to ban asylum seekers at the border, expel asylum seekers without giving them an opportunity to apply. And they're not even screening people for asylum at the border under COVID. So, for example, in June of 2019, there were over 10,000 people screened for asylum at the border. So they came to the border, they said, I need protection, and they got an interview. In June of 2020, only 620 people were screened at the border for asylum. Huge drop, from 10,000 to 600. They are also, during COVID, expelling thousands of unaccompanied minors. Unaccompanied minors are people who are under the age of 18 and arrive at the border without a parent. There are a lot of them coming from Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Mexico. And so what the administration has been doing under COVID is expelling them, even though federal law requires them to accept them. They're not accepting them, and they're not letting them in, and they're not letting them apply for protection. So we can see, for example, in April of 2020, the Border Patrol apprehended over 700 unaccompanied minors, but only processed 2 children per day. So only about 60 of those 700 children were referred to the Office of Refugee Resettlement as required by federal law. It's also been discovered recently that the federal government was secretly detaining children in hotels, and did that about 200 times before expelling them during COVID. And some of these children were held for 2 weeks and then expelled from the country, not allowed to apply for relief. Overall, it's estimated that the government has expelled, by expelled, I mean not allowed people to apply for protection, over 100,000 people through this summer. And they continue to divert money to the wall. So during 2020, about $7.2 billion was diverted from the Pentagon alone for wall construction. And during COVID-19, while the rest of us are busy looking at other things, they've continued to transfer public lands for wall construction. They've continued to waive environmental and contracting laws to build the wall, and they are continuing to deploy National Guard and active duty troops to the border. When we look at everything the administration has done, and again, this is the tip of a really evil and heinous iceberg. And when we look at what this administration has done, and I encourage you, if you're interested, to take a look at the Migration Policy Institute document. Very interesting and scary, but they've succeeded. They've succeeded in reaching a lot of their goals, and what was most helpful to them was really the pandemic, and it allowed this administration to make rapid changes without review, and under the excuse that these protections were needed because of COVID. So knowing this, knowing also that immigration, that the executive branch has a lot of influence on immigration and immigration law, it's really important for people who are concerned about this issue, who are concerned about immigrants and immigration and asylum seekers, to think, to participate in the federal elections, to think really clearly about what you're doing and about what would happen in 4 more years under this administration to legal immigration in our country.
Thank you so much. This has been an enlightening conversation, and I really appreciate your time and energy and effort and your depth of experience about this. So thank you.
All right. Thanks, Cheryl.